Just in time. Je suis là.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Laurent.
Hi, Hélène. How are you?
Very fine, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Hope that you can hear us. If that's the case, please can you check um, and um, and send us a message in the message box. We'll be starting right now with our webinar on mastering negotiation with consulting pricing benchmark. Bear with us, it's the first time we use this platform, so we may discover it with you. We've made some choice, but this is a different thing than going live. So let's get to it. So just very quickly, we're going to introduce yourself. My name is Hélène Lafitte. I'm the CEO of Consulting Quest. I'm a specialist in how to buy consulting services and, of course, negotiations and pricing benchmark are part of our daily, well, say weekly life, let's put it that way, especially for professional services and consulting. Laurent?
And on my end, my name is Laurent Thomas. I'm one of the founders of Consulting Quest, and I'm particularly looking after our digital platform.
Great. All right, so I think that one thing that is extremely important is to remember that information is a negotiator's greatest weapon. We've discussed in the past about asymmetrical information. You know, the case where you have an asymmetry between what the buyer knows and what the seller knows. And having some more information can really help the buyer to kind of fill the gap and know more about what they're buying actually and be more effective in buying. So this is what it's about. Pricing benchmark for any type of product or service including consulting, is a way to better the weapon of the negotiator. So today we're going to discuss first, we're going to have a sneak peek into consulting pricing, so you get a sense of how consulting firms build their pricing. And then we'll discuss about negotiations, how to negotiate in consulting, and also the power and pitfalls of pricing benchmarks, what you can really do with them and what you cannot do with them, and finally, how to leverage those pricing benchmarks efficiently. And of course, we'll have a question and answers at the end. But feel free to ask your questions right now, and really to participate. And you can't raise your hand, but that's the idea. It'd be more engaging if you can really stop now. Okay. So let's start with the sneak peek into consulting pricing. So it's all about how consulting firms build their price. And I think that you'll find that without surprise that the most of the cost for a consulting firm is consulting wages. Of course, it's an intellectual service, and so they're selling their time, and so therefore what their most precious assets is their people. And so you'll see that that's where they spend most of their budget. Then the second most important part is SG&A overheads, like in many companies, of course. That's where you put the rents and all of this.
And in consulting, if I can add,
Yeah.
you have had an evolution of the value chain recently, well, over the last, let's say, 10 years, where you find more and more costs in the overheads that are indeed ways to optimize the time of the consultant. So you will find research teams, you will find teams that are making slides. Sometimes it's in-house, sometimes it's outsourced. That's why this number is so big, because usually you will find one admin for five. So you would not expect 27%, especially as the wages of admins are lower usually. But it's because you find in there a lot of functions that are indeed support functions for the delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the next three, and all of this is our fixed costs, right? Things that are paid whether or not they have projects and they are successful.
And very, very often consulting firms budget the cost of the consultants as if they're gonna get their bonus, considering everything as a fixed cost. Of course, if the year doesn't go as planned, you can always tap into this bonus part. But the bonus pool we see here is indeed the profitability. The 15% you see there is the profitability. And what drives the profitability is the billable hours that you're getting from the consultants. And it's like when you are in the, I would say, in industry, and you have paid a lot of capex for your industrial asset, and you want to maximize the utilization of the asset. Here is the same thing. You have fixed costs that are the consultants, and what you want is to maximize the billable hours and reduce as much as possible the downtime or the time on the beach, as people say in consulting, where indeed you're either on pro bono topics or on thought leadership topics, and where you're not indeed charging anyone. It's the same for pretty much all the intellectual services.
No, absolutely. And so then you have a part that is not negligible, right? The bonus pool. And this is, we talk a lot about consultants and their high salaries, right? It's something that is very common, and everybody, I would say everybody, but a lot of people talk about it. But what they don't know, and you can see, when you see the proportion between the wages and the bonus pools, then you see that the variable part of their wages, this bonus, is very high, and it's not unusual to hit 40-50% of their revenues. So what we're looking at here is a huge pool, and that there are a lot of there are a lot of
we lost you, Ellen. So
yeah, yeah. I'm
I
sorry. I'm sorry. I had to click on the LinkedIn thing, so now it's live. Sorry about that. Maybe let's resume now that it's working. Go ahead.
so the reason we are showing this is not by randomly to educate people on the cost of consulting, is because this equation drives most of the conversation you will have afterwards with consultants when it comes to pricing. Because one thing they have in mind is to make sure that they staff as much as possible their consultants. So sometimes on projects, you will see projects that are staffing people from the beginning to the end of the project, when indeed you really need some expertise only for a couple of weeks or these kind of things. It's all driven by the optimization of the staffing, the billable hours, and the maximization of the profitability, which is not exactly aligned with the interest of the client. So that's where indeed the negotiation between what you want, what they want, has to find a middle ground.
No, absolutely. But I think that's important to see how they build their prices and what cost they're there in order to be able to negotiate well. I think this is part of those things that really make it important to understand. So now we're looking at the other side of the story, which is, so we looked at the cost breakdown. Now let's look at pricing strategies. As you know, consultants have not only one way of billing their time, and they have different ways to build their prices. And actually, there are two strategies that are quite common. One is the classic cost plus. I think that for everyone who's a bit familiar with pricing, this is not rocket science. This is not a discovery, right? It's very common. First is cost plus, meaning that they look at all the costs that you see before, in particular the fixed ones, and then they include a margin, a plus, if you will, which is the margin that they want to do, and then that's how they build their prices. That's one way to do it. But then there's another way to do it that is more based on value. And here, what they look at is the perceived value for you, the client, to know what is it that has value for my client. What am I looking at? And how could I charge? How much could I charge, based on that? And what would make sense for them, right? And based on that, that's how they build their price. And typically, that's what you see in project where you have, cost saving, for instance. What they do is that they offer a percentage of the savings. It's true that when you launch a project and say, hey, we have that project, we're going to bill you $1 million, like rough off the bat, and they say, no, never, I will accept such a price, right? But if they tell you, I'm going to charge you 100K, and then if we get savings, then that'll be 10%. Well, that means that when they reach 1 million, they saved you 10 million. Then it's much more bearable, if you will. Yes, of course, I'll be okay. I'll be okay spending 1 million if you get me 10 million. So that's the idea: is that this approach has to be linked to something tangible that you can attain. So revenue growth, strategic advantage, cost savings, improved valuation, whatever that is, that has a lot of value for you, and you're willing to share that value with the consultants. Right. So that's the other way. And behind that, you have different ways to do that. Of course, we're not going today to look into the time and material and the flat fees and all of this. We're going to go directly to the pricing, to benchmarks and negotiation, because I think that's really the core of what we want to discuss today. So let's move on. Any questions about this? Don't hesitate to ask, of course. So now let's discuss about negotiation in consulting. So first of all, let's make straight, what do you negotiate in consulting? Everything. I mean, we can say that. Like, literally everything. We negotiate the scope, we negotiate the deliverables, we negotiate the staffing, even who is going to be on the proposal. We negotiate, the timeline and the milestones as well, the fee and expenses, of course, the payment terms, and the other terms and conditions. Everything is on the table. And that's thing that what makes it a bit different from other services, right?
That's for sure. I cannot disagree. I cannot disagree with the statement. But one thing that we see that often people tend to negotiate just the fees.
Yeah.
When indeed it's all about what you're buying and what are the concrete deliverables, and in those deliverables, what are the must-have and what are the nice-to-have, and at the end of the day, as a consequence, what's the work plan, what is the staffing associated with the work plan, and there are situations where you end up having deliverables that are not clear or deliverables that are changing, which leads the consultant to taking a caution in the price they are providing, because they don't know if you're not going to change your mind in the middle of the road, and they don't want to negotiate a change order and all these kind of things, because we all know that it's often very complicated. The staffing is also a challenge, because you may not need the same resources at the beginning, at the end, in the middle. There might be a peak where you have everybody, but not always in the same way. Expenses, very important, and we'll come back to this. Payment terms is also something that is sometimes ignored, and that could be leveraged. So at the end of the day, you can play on all those dimensions, but people tend to negotiate mostly on fees, which leads to one thing which I was anticipating when I was in consulting. If you know that all you're going to get at the end of the day is a request to reduce your price by 5%, just bump your price by 5% at the beginning, then give it gladly to the procurement person, and then everybody is happy. Which is not the best way to do it, but that's the most efficient.
So what's interesting is that here there is a paradox. I think here is that you want to negotiate everything, and so the scope and the deliverables and the staffing, everything. But at the same time, you cannot impose too much, because each consulting firm will have a different way to do things and to deliver, and you need to leave them some room to express their unique perspective and unique way of doing things. So I think that the real challenge here is to negotiate, be conscious that everything is on the table, but still you cannot tell them, I want you to have that many people in your team, and then I want this and that and like this and like that, because if you do that, then you take their place. In fact, you're making their work in their stead, and I think this is not a good thing either. So there's a fine line here, and that's where you have to work with them to find what's best and what's the best balance between the impact and the scope and the budget that you have at the end, right? And so here are some levers that we use at Consulting Quest to negotiate with consultants. So you see that there are two kinds of levers. One kind is about scoping, and so in scoping we include also delivery setup, approach, staffing, among other things, and also some bundling and bundling. A smart way to organize, RFPs. So that's what we put in scoping. And then you have everything that's more on the pricing side, which are competition and rebates and discounts, the creative phase structure we discussed about, the value-based things, and then some other negotiation levers that are linked to design to cost or things like that. So, of course, if you look at it, you might think, oh, so we start with scoping and then we do pricing. Well, yes and no. So the whole point is that the whole negotiation will be kind of a bit of a back and forth between the two. Of course, you start with scoping, but your scope can evolve during a negotiation. You might realize, while discussing with consultant, that your initial scope did not make sense, or was inaccurate, or was too,
Too broad.
broad, or too shallow. And you need to have the liberty and the freedom to adapt. And then you go to the price, you say, oh my God, this is way too expensive. How we do that? And then you go back to say, well, maybe we could cut here, and maybe we could change a little bit the approach. Maybe we don't need 10 workshops. Maybe we can do only 6. And all of this will, one after one, we can reduce the cost. Because one thing is for sure is that consultants, they build their time, right? And they will probably, if you pressure too much on cost and you say we want 20% reduction, and they will descope for you. I mean, they will decide where they will not, they will change maybe the team. They will change the scope slightly. They will reduce the depth of the analysis, or they will change slightly the approach. The problem if you do that is that you don't know where they did it, and it
Mhm.
might not be what you need. They're their
And,
best bet, right?
and at the end of the day, it's also a question of return on investment. And we'll come back to it in a few minutes. But the scope drives what you get, and the pricing is what you pay. And sometimes it's almost futile to negotiate for ages on the pricing side when the value is tenfold on the result of the technical side, because those are indeed, you have a technical side and a commercial side, and they have to be adjusted properly, and we need always to make sure that we don't lose sight of the size of the price, which is the return on investment.
No, absolutely. So moving on to pricing benchmarks, you can imagine that pricing benchmark will help you on the right side of the levers, which are pricing. So the first thing is, why is it important? So I said briefly at the beginning what was asymmetrical information. It's when one part in a negotiation has way more information than the other one. It creates an imbalance, and it helps that party to have the upper hand in the discussion. And pricing benchmarks are typically a tool that can help break that asymmetrical information, at least on that pricing part, and help buyers to understand if what the consultants tell them is true or not. Like, it's simply put, that's what it's about. That's why it's important. It's because you don't know how much strategy consultants charge in Switzerland, in the pharmaceutical industry. And you may have been a strategy consultant in the past, Laurent.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know, because you've never been in the life science industry in Switzerland. You were in France, you were in the US, but you were not in Switzerland. And you were not in the life science industry. And all of this can change the price of a project, and they can change the price of a day, the daily fees, actually.
And most of the time, uh, be it executives or procurement people, they don't buy the same project twice.
Mhm.
Whereas the consultant is selling the same project over and over. It depends. Sometimes they are specialized and they kind of
That's
repeat,
what they're trying to do, though.
or sometimes they are creative and they adjust to every single situation. But in any case, one is selling stuff for a living, and the other one has a day job and is not buying consulting on a given topic or on a given niche every day. And this creates the typical asymmetry you find in most, I would say, non-repetitive buy. The typical
Mhm.
example being the used cars. If you buy a used car every 3 years, the guy in front of you might be selling a used car every week, if not every day. There's clearly, so here comes the idea to have benchmarks and to have rates and to have information to overcome at least part of this asymmetrical information.
Absolutely. Uh, so, but though there is a condition for that to write well, right? And that condition is based on the what information you get from your benchmark. So the first part is that you need to have something that has some granularity, right? Those some benchmark that say consulting in Europe on average is X. Okay, so what? What am I gonna get from that? And particularly, capability-based information. To give you an example, a strategy consulting in Europe on average at a daily rate is around 4,500 for a tier one consulting firm, where we're looking at 4,500. While tier one, same tier one, but with more operation based consultants, then you're going down to 2,500, between 2,500 and 3,000. So you see the difference is already important. And that's same tier, same industry, same, yes.
It also depends on how much business the consultants can expect from a given company. That's often part of the master service agreement. If you can secure that resources will be utilized all year long, then it means that the possibility to build those resources is increasing immediately by 25%, which means that you can, in return, expect some value sharing on the additional value that will come on the consulting side.
No, absolutely. And then you have differences between regions. I was mentioning that we know the prices for instance, France daily rates as consultants, but when you work in the US, you don't expect the same rates. Rates in the US are between 20 to 30% higher than in Europe. And also, the rates in the Middle East are higher than in Europe. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it is. All of this makes it different. It means that when a Europe-based consulting firms move to, goes and work in the Middle East, they will charge the Middle East rates while they still reimburse their expenses.
And
why?
You tend to see very little differentiation between tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which means that a lot of tier 2, tier 3 companies love to have offices established in the Middle East because they can charge tier 1 pricing, which is kind of a double markup.
Yeah, absolutely. Then you have the industry specifics. So this is, this is an interesting case. I think this is all about the willingness to pay. The perceived value. This is all about that. Some industries pay more for the exact same project than others. And to name them, life science, pharmaceutical, financial services pay way more than manufacturing or chemical industry will.
We are talking about 50 to 70% difference.
Yeah,
minimum.
This is a huge difference. This is very important, and there's not really a reasonable reason behind that, but that you're willing to pay more, or maybe that these companies don't look at their budget as closely as others do. Let's put it that way.
It's also that if I make a parallel with the chemical industry, I was for many years with a chemical company, and we were selling the same product in the oil and gas industry and in the home and personal care industry. Same product, packaged differently maybe, but same product, even maybe the same brand name. And we had 80% margin in one case and 15%, 1/5, on the other one. Because the soapers were very well organized and they knew exactly what was the cost of the product, and they had to keep that cost down, and the supply and demand situation was not favorable, and we had to squash our pricing. But in oil and gas, things were fine. People had absolutely no idea about what those products were, and we were enjoying very comfortable margin until crisis came.
It froze in Texas, like literally.
Everyone tried to reduce cost. They started to equip themselves with procurement people that knew what they were talking about when it came to chemicals. They brought in people from other industries that said, why the heck are we paying this for this product? I was paying half of that when I was at company X. And suddenly, the pricing converged. And what we can see is that there is a lot of movement within an industry. So even between aerospace and automotive, you will find executives moving back and forth. But it's not that frequent, except maybe in HR, that you find people moving from financial services to chemicals and vice versa. And to me, that's one of the main reasons that you cannot have people that have experience buying this in another industry, because the movements are within the industry or within Connex industries.
And so then there is a difference in profiles. I think that's very common. That the in many consulting firms, they have a pyramidal organization with the partner, and then they have the associate partner, and then they have the engagement manager, and then they have the etc. etc. And all the different profiles have different daily rates. And it's important to make that difference, because if you don't, then you're pulling your prices up. And I have a very good example for that. It's a company that had negotiated MSAs with only one price point. That's it, one price point. The problem is that when you do that, unless you know very, very well consulting, and you're able to build a basket, an average basket that is really, really representative of what you'll get later, then there's a good chance that you'll get prices that are completely off charts, that they don't work. And so having that granularity between the different profiles can help you really understand what you're paying for what. And daily rates on the years of experience of someone. And I think this is a proxy for expertise, but that's just what it is. It's not because you have 30 years of experience in consulting that you have more expertise than someone who is 10 years younger than you.
Well, also, it depends on the topic. When you're working
Exactly.
with someone, sometimes companies want to work with people they trust and they know, and they will ask to the guy that has been helping them on supply chain to help them on pricing. And guess what? Expertise, 20 years of experience in supply chain do not trump 10 years of experience in pricing. I can attest to that.
That's it. And then you have tier-based. You have the tier. The tier is the type of consulting firm. So tier 1 is the usual suspects: McKinsey, BCG. You'll find Bain, and then you have the Big Four: Deloitte, KPMG, etc. All those big firms in consulting. You'll find them in tier 1, and then you have tier 2, and then you have tier 3 that is made of boutique, like small consulting firms. And of course, the pricing between those three are very different. It can be twofold between on daily rates between 1 and 3, and sometimes more than twofold. So this is very important to understand, because you should not pay more than the market prices, unless it's a specific thing. And then rebates that we discussed, that is like when, and that's particularly true for long-term project and MSAs. You want to get an advantage. Again, consulting firms, we saw that consulting firms main center of cost is wages for consultants, right? And so it means that their main objective is to staff their teams. If you're able to guarantee in some way a 6 months assignment, that means that this is that much that they don't spend on marketing, on sales, and on idle time that they pay without being billed, right?
Well, we need to be aware about rebate practices as well. I've seen recently rebate practices that were just a joke, asking the client to spend $10 million to get access to 2% of rebate, that were indeed not starting at 10 million, but not starting at 0, but from 10 onwards. Meaning that if you were spending 20, you were getting 1 on average on the entire amount, when the margins were in the range of 40 to 50%. So
and it was not even a payback. It was for further projects.
Yes, it was a credit for new projects. So it was not even something you could use to pay some of the existing projects. It was just for new projects, where you will, of course, get another 1%, I assume.
Yeah, maybe not. We don't know. No, but I think that we this is a topic that is really interesting and where the practices are changing, but it's still. I mean, it's not yet tilting in the favor of the clients. Really, it's just another way to lock in their clients and to uh, instead of really being some commercial, real commercial gesture. I
But
think
it's
that
mostly
for now.
about having options. It's
Yeah.
having options, having information, and being willing to change. I was reading the
Exactly.
other day that I don't know that there are only 2.5% of the people that are in a given bank that have changed bank over the last 5 years. So when you're in a
Yeah,
bank, you don't change, and maybe you should. And where you're with a consulting firm, sometimes you should change as well. Or if you don't change, at least you should talk to other people to understand if everyone is staying fair.
yeah. No, I agree. So we discussed about all of this, but and what advantage and what information you can get from your pricing benchmark. But there are limitations to pricing benchmarks, and of course they are linked to the granularity that you can get, and unless you have that granularity it's going to be very hard to negotiate. But even if you have the right granularity and you have the perfect benchmark, there are still limitations to pricing benchmark. And I think that we started to touch upon that. It's they will give you daily rates, which is just one part of the equation of the fees, right? The other part of the equations is workload, is experience, and its approach, which can be very, very specific to the consulting firm. And to give you an example, you can have on the exact same, bid, you can have two companies that will do the work, one in 5 weeks, the other one in 6 weeks, with different teams. One will have very experienced consultants that cost higher, that cost more than the other ones, and the other ones will have less experienced, consultants and a larger team, and but with daily rates that are lower. But ultimately, at the end, you may be surprised by who will be get you the best value and the best price, because
Yep.
it's not only about daily rates. Daily rates are just one part of the problem. And that's why you cannot just negotiate on daily rates. You have to think about what is the approach, what is the value that I get, is it worth it? And then and that's for a one-time project, that's the way. But for when you're negotiating an MSA, then you have to find creative ways to go
I mean,
around that.
it's very simple. You say I need 5 guys for 3 months, or I need three guys for 4 months.
Hmm.
It's the equivalent of 15 in one case, 12 in the other case,
Yeah.
which means that you have a 20-25% difference between the two. And if you negotiate the rates, maybe you will get a 10% difference between the two. So
Yeah.
indeed, knowing how it will be applied and how the staffing will be done and so on gives you really an indication about how it works. Also, if you work sometimes with tier two consulting firms, tier three consulting firms, they are more flexible and they will allow consultants to be part time on projects, whereas the large machines are only with full times for the entire duration of the project. So there are some optimization that you find only when you are applying to concrete examples. So use
Yeah.
cases are part of the process.
Absolutely. And just to move to the next part, which is how to leverage pricing benchmarks effectively, and we'll give you some examples of what information can be used to what effect, right? Uh, so let's look at information that we get about how much we're spending versus competition and versus the industry, and these and also where do I spend, in what type of capability am I spending. This information is very interesting, not necessarily for uh, MSAs or for specifically one project, but still this will get you an overall sense of how much you're spending, how do you compare with your peers, and also what are your priorities. And that's where it becomes interesting, because when you negotiate your MSAs, you want to build buckets, segments, where you will have a given number of suppliers, and that's how you will, organize your MSAs by segments. If you know what are the segments, if you know which ones you're really spending most of your money, that's where you want your MSAs.
If I make a parallel with the way companies manage their capital expenses, they tend to more and more professionalize the way they are doing this. But there are a few KPIs. You know, how much capex do you have as compared to your total turnover?
Mm-hmm.
Are you spending more than your peers? Where are you spending your money? Are you spending on gross capex? Are you spending on maintenance capex? Are you spending on safety capex? And how is this distributed? The same thing could apply if you look at your R&D spend. Are you spending on big bets? Are you spending on incremental innovation? Are you spending on open innovation? It's just about knowing, okay, I have an amount that I'm spending. I need to spend it strategically. And first, I need to know what I spend and what that means if I look at my peers, and then where am I spending it, and where do I get the biggest returns for my money. And that's the first part of the journey, is to understand what's happening with this huge amount that can be up to 3% of the turnover of a company.
No, absolutely. And I think also that sometimes because the spend is scattered, we may have the feeling that we're spending our money in the right places compared to our strategic goals or whatever transformation is going on right now. But then when you see the numbers, you say like, why are you spending like 25% on our spend on supply chain when you're in the middle of an HR transformation and we have almost nothing in there? And these are very valid questions that you
And
should ask yourself.
why am I spending 25% on HR when I cannot deliver the clients?
Yeah, exactly. Likewise. But that's important to look at what are your priorities. In what stage of transformation are you? Does it make sense to spend that much money on consulting or that little money in consulting, considering what our ambitions are and how we work with consultants and how we do in terms of delivery of project initiative delivery and so on. So
We
all
have
of
been
these are
working with a
questions. Yeah.
company. We have been working with a company recently. Three priorities: growth, sustainability, people, and the budget 80% on supply chain.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah,
But that's also something very important. So next is that information about regional and tier information, but also industry information and so on. So here, what you'll get from that is check where you stand. Am I spending the right amount of money on consulting on my project? Am I paying the right price for my project? Am I working with the right people? And is my portfolio of suppliers balanced between tier one, tier two, and tier three? We'll give you another example. We've worked recently with a company which is a rather big one, but not that big, right? They're not part of the. I'm not sure they're part of the Fortune 1000, but they're not that big. Um, and they have a significant amount of money that they spend on consulting. Um, but then almost half of that is spent with a tier one consulting firm. And on like every type of project, from finance to supply chain to HR to safety to everything we say in French, from the floor to the ceiling, like they're everywhere. And so the question here is, does that make sense to have this consulting firm everywhere? I'm not saying that you cannot have a tier one consulting firm when you're not a super big company. I think that tier one consulting firm have um, you know value. They bring value in certain type of project. They bring value in certain when you're looking for political value and etc. And when you're working on company wide transformation stuff like that. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it shouldn't be unbalanced. You should have kind of a fair number in each category. And here, if it's completely skewed one way or the other, you may not get the best of your consulting spend. So this is what it's about. And so looking at what is your portfolio is important. And that's how you look how much am I paying the fair price based on the region, based on the capability, based on on the industry that I'm in? Do I have a balanced
Yeah.
portfolio? And now how can I build or rejuvenate my panel in order to have something that really brings value?
So said otherwise, I'll take an image. Did I pay the fair price for my Porsche? First question. Second question, why am I using my Porsche all the time? Why am I using my Porsche to go to work? Why am I using my Porsche when I go hunting in the woods? Why am I doing those things that do not really make sense and are kind of very expensive means to achieve an objective? And the direct image is that you could have different consultants to define your strategy and to track the progress of your strategy. Because when it comes to creating a project management office, creating project charters, making the planning of the project, and then doing a reporting red, amber, green once a month, you don't need to pay $4,000 a day to do that. That's as simple as that.
No, exactly. And so if we go back now to all that information and how do you make sense of this? For one-time project, obviously the benchmark can help you validate, make a ballpark validation of, do I have a fair price? Do I have a fair offer? And then it can help you also strategize some counter offers on pricing, but not only, because we saw about rebates, etc. So that's the thing. But one thing that is very important here is to keep two things in mind when you're doing that. First, let's remember that what you're looking for is value, and cost is just come with it. But at the end of the day, what you're looking for is value. It's ROI, if you will. Higher ROI is what you're looking for. The second thing that is very important and very, very often overlooked is time versus value trade-off. So let me explain what it means. When you have a project that is, for instance, a time to market, project, and you want to improve your time to market, and you want to work with consultants, and you know that your competitor is working on a similar project or a similar product than you, but they're a bit, behind you. You have the advantage to that. And you want to accelerate your time to market because you want to be the first, you're the first taker. So you work with consultants, but then you say, but this is too expensive. And so you spend 1 week and 2 weeks and 3 weeks. While your competitor, he didn't negotiate that much, and then he's starting now. And at the end of the day, he may start with before you. Here, your project is time sensitive. The sooner it's done, the sooner you get the value, the higher your value you get, and the further you'll get. So you have to think before you start negotiating endlessly for 5%. How much am I losing in the time I negotiate?
So let's say you're launching a new product that is supposed to generate 2 million in the first year. And you can get a lower cost with someone that takes 3 months longer to do it. If it's 3 months longer, it's the equivalent of 500 on the year, and even more than that, because you probably have a ramp up. So the last quarter is probably much higher than the first quarter. So when you're pushing things to the left, you might be losing up to half of that. So you're losing 1 million, and you save 100k. Saving 100k, congrats. But at the end of the day, we lost 900 on the P&L. So that's the trade-off we need to have in mind.
And that's why you cannot just negotiate. It has to, you have to think and broaden your perspective and look at the big picture. I'm not saying that you should not negotiate. Yes, you should. But you need to be also practical and think about value that you can get out of a project. Now, for MSAs, it's a bit different. Of course, still ballpark validation. Am I in the right range? Are these price competitive? That's fine. But then you also need to think about that specific consulting firm with their unique way and unique approach. How much am I going to pay for a given project? And that's very, very hard, because when you're negotiating MSAs, you're not negotiating with an approach, you're not negotiating with an RFP of a specific project, you're just looking at prices. So one method that has been used more and more now is to have the consultants to price a mock project or several mock projects to have a sense of how they would do it, and how to compare apples to apples, right? Really. And that's why we're saying that the total project cost is what it's about. That's what you should look at, instead of just looking at individually, daily rates that
You
don't
can do
really
it
make sense.
you can do it in two ways. One is you
Mm-hmm.
take all projects that you have had, and
Yeah.
you just ask them to quote on those projects. A simple thing, one page, describe overall what would be your deliverables, your high level methodology, and what would be the cost by phase, so that you can compare. Another one is that we have started as Consulting Quest to use a standardized use cases, so that we can compare also from one industry to another and to peers. So it's not exactly applying to your case, but it's helping to compare also with what's happening in the industry. And
Yes.
of course, one is requesting that you work with us. The other one you can do on your own. So
That's the very
it's
different.
your
Yeah,
own choice. It's not exactly available to everyone.
there's that. And so what is interesting is that the daily rates that you're going to negotiate will establish long-term price anchors. And what is interesting is that this is where you will end up in your project. You know that the price, the real prices that will be applied to your project will be slightly different than the rate that you have in your MSAs, and that's fine. But it still is defining, where where are your points on the curve. The last thing is to leverage rebates and volume discounts, and that's where having some information about what is done in the industry, what can be done, what is acceptable, what is common, can really help you. Because here we're really in the dark, and when consultants don't know, when clients don't know, consultant can just say, "Hey, no, nobody does that. I mean, this is unheard of." Well, maybe, and
Yeah.
and this is a tough one, right? But I think that what is really important is that, and I repeat it, is that the goal is not to get the lowest price always. I think that at some point we need to find a deal that is win-win for everyone, and both the client and the consultant must be willing to enter an agreement that's equitable, because the goal, especially with MSAs, is to build long-term relationship, and there's value in building intimacy with a consultant, and there's value in working with familiar consultants. So you should be looking for that as well.
And when you
Yeah,
have them, use them.
yeah,
Because we
work with
have
them.
of companies that spend months negotiating MSAs and then accept pricing that is not based on rates, or companies that are accepting some terms in the MSA and then are immediately renegotiating those terms on each and every single project, which is not the
Both
right way.
are wrong. Yeah,
In both cases, there is a loser.
yeah, exactly. And it's not working either way. Well, that was the end of the presentation. I think that the what is important here is to kind of a nutshell, to remember that pricing benchmark are useful. They are useful. They are important, and in particular to cover one size of negotiation that based on pricing, and but it's not the alpha and omega of negotiation for consulting services. It cannot be. There's much more to that. We saw that negotiation can cover many topics, and it's important also to think about not only from a cost perspective but from a value perspective, and look at what is really important is that you get the value and the result that you're looking for at the end of the day, which
Mhm.
are not about how much of the 5% you're gonna gain on a negotiation, but instead what value will be delivered at the end of the project, and how much you will really, how much you will move the needle for your company. And all of this, though, you see, is speaking about the fact that negotiation, even with pricing, benchmark, cannot be done solely by procurement alone, right? They cannot do that by themselves. It has to be a collaboration between the consultant, the procurement and the business line, the one that require the project. This is the end of the day. That's my only excuse.
So
Um,
one question for you, Helen.
yeah.
We got that on the direct messages. Um, what is how long does it take to renegotiate all this, starting from scratch? What would be the duration of a project to renegotiate conditions with a full panel?
Um, well, it. So I'll say that I'll use a consultant answer. It depends. Well, yes, it depends on the complexity of your panel and your segmentation, but you should expect 2 to 3 months to rejuvenate a panel, because there are, I would say, three things that you need to work on. The first thing is everything that's linked to segmentation and preparing the all the material for the tender and the IFIs and the mock projects, etc., etc. And that takes time to do it right. That's the first part. Second part is to identify the right consulting firms and get them to answer, which is not easy, right? Sometimes it's really hard to find the right people to come to your bids, and you want consulting firm that fits some sort of a strategy, meaning that when you're working on your segmentation, when you're working on the IFI, you should also think about, what is my strategy for this category or for that segment? What profiles am I looking for? Do I want big firms, small firms, a mix of both? And that will decide who you're going to look for and who you're going to source. And once you've built your list, then you get them, you sign the NDA, before you send an RFI, of course, and then you start the rounds of negotiation and so on. And that's why it takes a long
Yeah, it's
time
kind
to
of
do so.
a couple of weeks of preparation, then reach out, sending the material, getting the answers, shortlisting who you want to meet, then meeting the
Yeah,
people, and then negotiating with those who you want to work with in the future. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
I would agree. 3 months is probably a good ballpark target. If you are a smaller company and you just want to have 3 or 4 partners, this can probably be done in half the time.
No, absolutely, and it also depends. Yeah, it depends on how many companies you invite to the bid. The
Okay.
bigger, the more complex, of course.
Okay.
Any other question?
Well, the only question I would have is probably what you have on the next page, is how to participate to this benchmark.
Yes, absolutely. So just if you're interested in participating in the benchmark we're launching, it's let's say it's a special version in the sense that it's not you come and we sell you data points. The idea is really benchmark in the initial sense, is that participating in the cluster that it built around your industry, about your companies that are comparable to you and that in your region, and to really to build that granularity that we discussed before. That's what's the point. It's like, how do you get the best information to you, and then build around clusters, so every time we build a report, it's valuable to you directly, and you don't have to wait or have in practical data to work with. And
So
so if you're in, yes,
we have already launched on chemicals. Next
yes,
one to start is pharmaceutical.
yes,
And then I would say that the next two will probably be financial services and utilities.
absolutely. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to drop us an email,
We have
scl
another
at
one.
consultingquest.com. Yeah.
We have another one that Helen mentioned earlier, which is that just focused on the Middle East,
Yes.
across all industries. In this case, just looking at one region, because there is a potential for 50% savings over there.
Yes, absolutely. So that's it. We're just in time. That's perfect. Thank you,
That,
everyone.
that
Thank
was the first
you.
time. That was the first time on this new
Yes,
setup. So do not
yes,
hesitate
you
to
see.
send feedback if you enjoyed it, and if you think we should continue on this format. That would be
Absolutely.
great.
And our next webinar will be in May, May 23rd, and we'll discuss about, how to leverage digital to transform consulting procurement.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.